Hi there and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And in this one we're going to be looking at the creation of an oscilloscope. Now I originally did this about 3 years ago as a series of tutorials. There were 3 of them and they appeared on Vimeo and they're still actually there if you'd care to take a look at them. You may find a few tips within them that may be useful to you in other projects. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. But when I'd finished that series, Ilir Beqiri got in touch with me and he said to me, you know, there's an easier way you can achieve what you've done there, because at the time I was just using, well, just basic splines and an Expresso expression to control them, along with some MoGraph and sound effects and things like that. And he said, no, you can actually do this with MoSpline. And I didn't know anything about MoSpline at the time. It was a bit of a dark art to me, and in many ways it still is, because I'm not a MoGraph expert, even though I do things with Python effectors and stuff like that. But anyway, he sent me a file with the expression to actually make this happen. And I reverse engineered it, and that's what I'm going to present to you today, because he was happy for me to make the tutorial and he didn't really want to make one himself. So without further ado, let's give it a go and we'll see what we can come up with. What I'm going to show you first, though, are the materials that I've got prepared here. Now, I've got a screen over here, which is, it's just a disc for the oscilloscope, a basic disc screen, because we're making this like a retro green screen type oscilloscope, because I think they're really cool. So down here in the materials, all I've got in here is colour. It's black at the moment. What I'm going to do is just go into RGB here, and I'm just going to make it off black towards the green end of the spectrum there, so that we've got something that resembles the old green screen type of oscilloscopes there. That looks quite nice. The next thing I've got, as you can see, I've got an axis texture, which gives us a grid that overlays the screen, as you often see on oscilloscopes. And if we go into there, I've just got a luminance channel and an alpha channel for that. If I go into the luminance here, and the alpha is exactly the same, we've got in the texture, I've just come down to effects here and selected spline. And in the spline, I've just dragged in what I'm calling a plane spline here, and that's just dragged into there. I've given it a colour, sort of a more sort of insipid green, and I've given it a single pixel for its line width, which is working perfectly well for what we need. So that's all I've done there. In order to create this spline, what I did, surprisingly enough, was create a plane and set that up at, well, set it up at positive Z. If we just move it back a little bit and towards the side here, zoom out a little bit so that we can see what we're about. What I've done, I simply went into the plane here. I gave it 2 segments in the width and height, and I'll just change my display. I'll just say NB to go into garage shading lines. And we can see that our plane has got the division that we want it to have. Then I simply made it editable. Came over here into edge mode, selected all the edges, and then in our conversion on the mesh menu there, I just said edge to spline, pulled that out of the plane there, and then got rid of the plane. And then all I did was simply drag this plane spline, as I say, into the spline field in the texture, and that's as simple as that. The only other thing I did to make it work, if we just go to the tag here, I set the U offset to 50% and the V offset to -50. If I just say NA to get us back to garage shading. And the reason I did that is because I wanted these crosshairs at the center here of the screen. So if you don't do that, then they're not going to look, well, I don't think, as pleasing on the eye. So that's why I did that. I mean, if you don't agree, by all means, don't do the offsets, just leave them at 0. But that's how I wanted it set up. So that gives you the basic idea of what's going on there. I've also got another texture here, which is for the waveform. I'm going to show you this a little bit later, what we're going to do with it. But it's set up in exactly the same way, pretty much, except that I've got a glow channel as well. So I've got a luminance and an alpha with the spline field again, and we're going to drag a spline into there a little bit later and set that up. Okay. So let's move on from here. First thing we need to do is come down to MoSpline here in the MoGraph menu and grab one of those. The setup for it is almost exactly what we want, and in fact initially it could be left as it is, but we do want it in simple mode. We don't need to adjust anything else down here. We will be using a destination spline, but not quite yet. In the simple tab here, we just need to set the length to 100. Don't need to record that. And we need to set the steps to 40. Other than that, if we just zoom out, because we can see our MoSpline. Now, our MoSpline at the moment is pointing along the Z-axis. We don't want that, so we need to adjust angle H to 270. And that gives us our setup for our MoSpline as it is at the moment. The next thing we're going to need is a tag on our MoSpline, and we need a MoGraph weight map tag. And this is pretty much one of the key parts of this, actually. Now, if we just zoom in on the MoSpline there, it is sort of trying to do something, I think, but it hasn't quite done it. But anyway, that's the MoSpline set up with its weight tag for the moment. The next thing we need to do is give it a programming tag, and you guessed it, it's going to be our old friend Expresso. So we'll bring that one in and place it over there so that we can start dragging a few things in. First thing that needs to come in is the MoSpline. So we'll drag that in. And at the output stage, we need to come down to simple. And in the sub menu here, we just need steps. Okay, so that's set up there. Next thing we need to bring in. Well, it's interesting because in the expression that I was sent, there was actually a math subtract. And it was a subtract 1. And it's going to subtract 1 from an iteration that we're going to put in next. But we'll set this up. And we'll put it as subtract 1. I don't personally think this is absolutely necessary. It didn't seem to do an awful lot to me, but I'm going to leave it in for now. We'll perhaps have a play with that later. So let's get an iteration. Now our iteration start is going to be 0 because we're going to be iterating through the points of our MoSpline. So we can leave that as it is. Our iteration end we can take from our math subtract. Okay, so that's fine. Moving on from here, we need a math modulo. So I'm going to grab a hold of our subtract and copy it, and then change the function to modulo. Our iteration output can go in our top input there, and we simply need to put 2 in here. Okay. Following on from this, we need a condition. And we're going to use the output of our modulo in the switch. Okay. In input 2, we're going to say -1, and in input 3, 1, because we want to be able to alternately switch these points to either positive or negative. So that's why we're doing that. And you can see that if we do that, we're going to create the shape of a wave. And that's exactly what we need to do. And then moving on from this, we need to grab in our weight map. So we'll pull that into there and give it an object output port. And then our final node we can get from motion graphics, and we need a MoGraph weight node. So we bring that in there. And at the input stage, we also need the value as well as the index and the weight tag. Well, the weight map is obviously going to be plumbed into the top input there. So that's given us that and taken away the error. The iteration can be plugged into the index. And finally, the value is the result of the condition, which is going to alternate using this modulo on the iteration. It's going to alternate between 1 and -1, or -1 and 1, if we want to be pedantic about it. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at everything here and see how we're getting on. So we'll just move that out of the way. Just zoom out a little bit further, I think, so that we can see everything. Okay, now nothing is happening at the moment, and it won't because we need effectors. So what we're going to do, 2 weight maps in there, just take one of those away. Okay, make sure we've got the correct one of those in there. I'm just going to drag that back in there to make sure I've got the right one. I think I had anyway. Right, so let's get an effector in, and we'll start with a sound effector. Just bring that into there. Go into my MoSpline effectors. I'll drag that in. I should have had my MoSpline selected, but that's okay. So in my sound effector there, the first thing I need to do is grab in a sound. So let's get one of those. And I'll use the Maxon Tech Loop. That's probably the best one to use. I know it's no copyright on that, so that's fine. And then in my amplitude field here, I can use this particular probe to cover the whole sound wave there. That's what we want to do. The mode or the distribution can be left at iterate. That's absolutely fine. And the sampling, which is key, has got to be steps. I said that steps are going to be very important here. We'll set that to step. Okay, you can see it has made a difference. So that's all set up in there. Frequency, you can see, you can leave it at frequency or you can put it at volume. It doesn't really make an awful lot of odds, to be perfectly honest with you. But we'll leave it as it is. Let's have a look, see where we are. Now the selection, that's the last thing we need to change. We just need to bring in our MoGraph weight map. Okay, and that hopefully should be everything set up apart from parameters. Let's just have a look in here. So position Y, of course, is what we're going to deal with because we want plus or minus on the position Y. I'm going to set that to 20 and hope that that's okay for this. And then that's essentially, should be the setup. So we should be able to play this and see if we get anything. Right, we are. So we can see, if we have a look at our MoSpline, we can see that it's behaving as we'd expect it to. Don't want that. We can see that this is definitely behaving exactly as we'd expect it to. And that's great. So this setup is working perfectly well. Now I said that we play around with the subtract. Let's just see if we can see any difference when we take that subtract out of the equation there. So we've got our MoSpline dancing around. Let's just keep that dancing around. Let's just take this from here and put it in there. Now I can't see any difference. I don't know whether you are, but I cannot see the slightest difference. It doesn't appear to have made any significant difference to that at all. Certainly not a difference that I think would detract from it in any way, shape or form. No, I don't think there's any difference there. I really don't. So personally, I would probably leave that out because it just doesn't appear to do anything. But up to you. You can leave it in if you wish. So I'm just going to close this down for now. And the last port of call that we need to actually do to make this work with the oscilloscope and actually put it on the screen, we need to go into our waveform, into our spline. And for now, what we're going to do is drag in the MoSpline. We're going to put that on there. And straight away it comes up on the screen, or on the texture screen at least anyway. And what we'll do is go into texture here and we'll just copy this and paste it in the alpha. It's the quickest way to do it. So we'll paste that shader into the alpha and straight away up it comes on the screen. Okay, and I've left the alpha, I've got soft image alpha and pre-multiplied on, so that's the way to set up the alpha there. In the glow, what I've done, if we just take a quick render, I'll just zoom in a little bit on the screen so we can see it a bit better. If I just take a quick render, you can see the glow is there. And it's what I've done, I've set the inner strength at 50, the outer at 200, and the radius at 2 centimeters. I found that worked really well. It was really pleasing on the eye. If you don't agree, by all means change it to whatever suits you. But that's worked for me. Okay. And another thing to remember as well in the texture here, if we go down to the viewport, make sure you turn on animate preview, otherwise you won't see the texture doing its job in the viewport. Okay, because when we play this, of course, we're seeing it. You won't see that if you don't turn on animate preview, for anybody who doesn't know. Okay, so that's important. Now I said earlier that I was going to create another spline for the waveform, and if we just take that render again, this is very spiky. It's like a sort of almost like a triangle wave, isn't it? Like a triangular wave. Now, if you don't want that and you want a more rounded or more curved spline, then the best thing to do is to create a destination spline for the MoSpline. So we want something that's going to go in this field here. All you need to do is just get a hold of your spline pen and create something like that, and that's enough. It doesn't need to be any more than that. So go back into MoSpline. I'm going to call this wave and drop that in to my destination spline. Now we should see a difference. If we go down to our MoSpline here, we can see, I don't know whether you get off, I don't know whether you can see that, but you can see a curved spline running along the MoSpline. Now if I go into my MoSpline here, let's have a look, see what I've got. If I just say line, that gives you the idea. Now you can see what's going on. So we are getting a curved spline. However, it's not really the spline I want to see because it's a Bezier spline. It's better if you set it up as a cubic spline, and then you get the spline that you want. It's a much nicer shape. So use a cubic. You can also use an Akima if you wish, but I think a cubic is best. That was what I felt was most pleasing on the eye. Again, if it doesn't suit your taste, by all means change it. And then to finish this off and to get it on the screen, we simply need to drag it into the field that we've got in here. So instead of using the MoSpline, we're going to use Wave. And we'll just go into the alpha and do the same in there actually. Just drag that into there. Okay, and that sets that up. And now if you render that out, you'll find that you're going to get something much more akin to what you want. Yeah, we've got a curved, you can see it's curved. That's exactly what it should look like. To me, that's beautiful. Okay, and in here, I mean, just to talk about this, I should mention this actually. The offsets and the way this is set up is important. Obviously, I've given it a sort of bright green colour, that sort of green screen colour that you get with old monitors and old oscilloscopes. And in the offsets here, I've got 100.6 in the X, in the Y, 50%, minus 100 in the X scale, and the Y scale minus 50. Single pixel, and that's as much as I've done in there. And obviously I've unchecked the text spline in all of these because we didn't want text splines in them. So that's essentially the way you set up an oscilloscope using MoSpline. It's a great technique, but we can take it a little bit further than this, because at the moment we're using the sound effector. We don't have to use the sound effector. There's a couple of others that we can use, and I'm going to show you those now. One is pretty obviously going to be the random effector, so we'll bring that one in. And again, I don't think I was selecting, so I haven't got it in there. So let's just drag that random effector in there. That's going crazy. What I'm going to do is just switch off my sound effector for now. Now in my random effector, let's have a look at my objects. So for a start, I've got to bring in the effector, I've got to bring the selection in. So let's just bring the MoGraph weight map in there. It's got to be set up. I don't want it set up in the X. I don't want it set up in the Z. That's better. Now we're getting something that's more akin to a sound wave, aren't we? Or a squiggly wave anyway. That's much better than it was. So we can leave the rest of that all set up as it is, and then all we've got to do is set. Well, let's just see what happens if we use this now. Let's just play this through, see what we get. Okay, at the moment it's just there and it's not animated, and the reason for that is because the mode is set to random. If we set that to turbulence and then we play that, we get something that's working. You can also use others. I think you can use noise. I think noise will work, won't it? Yeah, noise does work. Again, it's a different artistic look. That might be pleasing. It might give you what you want. But I also found that if I just set it to turbulence, go through that, and I also then decided to check the index box, and that gives us something I think is even better. Now that really is nice. That's a really good artistic look. But again, if it doesn't suit your taste or it's not to what you need, then don't check it and just go back to something like this, or play around with other settings on it and see what you want. But very versatile. That's quite a nice versatile effector for this, and works very nicely. So that's the random effector. Moving on from here, I'm going to show you the formula effector, and don't be too scared of this one. This is quite a clever effector. I mean, yes, you do need to be quite mathematically minded to get it to really work. But if we just drag the MoGraph weight map into there, I'm going to leave the formula set up as it is, because actually it does something quite interesting. So if we just switch off our random effector, and I bet I didn't have it selected, did I? Drag that into there. Okay, so now we've got that set up. You can see it's not 100% correct because we need to go into the parameters. We don't want that at 50. We want the Y at 50. And now we've got quite an interesting shape there. And if we play that, we can see that it's doing something very interesting on the screen. However, it's going from right to left, which is possibly what we don't want. Well, the easiest way to fix that is to just turn your screen through 180 degrees. If we get it into model mode, it's already at 180. So let's just make it at 0. And now it will go left to right, and exactly what you'd expect it to be. But that's a very, very nice effect, just using the formula effector there. And of course, if you are mathematically inclined, you can change this formula to give you all kinds of different waveform types in there. So, you know, it's quite a versatile way of doing it. So yeah, I mean, there's 3 different effectors that you can use, which all give you different results on the oscilloscope screen there. All of them are great. It's just, you know, artistically they're brilliant, and you can change them and make adjustments to them to your heart's content. I mean, you can come into the parameter. If you don't want that to be quite that big, just drop it down, and straight away it's changing. So yeah, it's a really, really versatile way of creating an oscilloscope. So just using MoSpline, fantastic way of doing it. And obviously with the sound effector, if you don't, you are going to get sound. And interestingly enough, I find it quite strange that in this modern day sound effector there's no way that you can turn the sound off. There used to be a sort of play scrub button, but they've taken that away for some reason. But anyway, not to worry, it's not a major problem. But yeah, I mean, that essentially completes this tutorial. So I'm going to say that I hope you've really enjoyed this one. I've had a lot of fun making it. And many thanks to Ilir for getting in touch and giving me the opportunity to make this. I've learned a lot by doing it. So thanks, Ilir, for reaching out. It's been great. And I'll see you on the next tutorial very soon.